I would say fantasy sports has really changed how fans watch sports, right? So, do you play fantasy sports?
I do occasionally. Like I'm kind of on again, off again with it.
Okay, so I mean, it's been around for a long time. It started in baseball, really started out with really hardcore nerds of baseball, but then in the late 90s, early 2000s, it really transformed into a popular cultural phenomenon where you had a lot of sports fans, primarily in football, that played. And it took the traditional fan of being, someone who's a fan of the Minnesota Vikings or New York Giants. And it took them from being a singular focus of just that team and maybe that team's rival to watching all of the NFL games because now they have players that play on the Arizona Cardinals and the Miami Dolphins. And because of that and their interest of those players, they're watching games on Thursday night and Saturday night sometimes, and Sunday and Monday, and on the holidays all over the place. And those interests go beyond just those players, but because of those players, they are competing against their best friends, they're competing against their family members. So it's pretty personal. And that interest, has taken a league that was already really popular and made it even more popular.
I'm a big numbers person. So like on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being the lowest, 10 being the highest. Like how big of an impact would you say fantasy sports has had?
Oh gosh, it depends on the league. I would say the NFL was already extremely popular when fantasy football took off, but I would say in terms of increasing its value and increasing the value of um, the media broadcast rights, I would say it's probably a six.
What's kind of the dark side or the downside, whichever one of those you want to look at?
I think the one that I think popular culture has talked about is the dehumanization of players. I think, and we've studied this, we've done a couple of studies on the potential dehumanization of players. I think, Twitter and the dark side of social media has pointed out a number of bad instances where, and even I think the players have highlighted it too, especially the NFL players that have been, the ones that get injured, right? Players, they can't, they trust me, they don't want to get hurt either. But if you're, a highly sought after NFL player in fantasy sports, if you're a top tier running back or quarterback, and you get hurt in week one, the fantasy sports, population blames you for getting hurt. And they'll, they not only will they come after you on Twitter and on Instagram, they'll go after you in the stadium and they'll make comments like you ruined my fantasy season. They're obnoxious. It turns out that's a small minority of the million, like tens of millions that play fantasy sports. But that's one downside is that intense connection to playing fantasy sports. We have found instances that the increased attention across the league has taken away from that favorite team fandom, right? So, who's your favorite NFL team if you have one?
Buffalo Bills.
All
Yeah,
right.
and I say it
Well,
like that, right? It's hard to be a Buffalo Bills fan. I
it is.
love
There's a
them.
couple.
It's hard.
Yeah, there's a couple of fan bases, and sorry to interrupt. There's a couple fan bases that have had a rough run, right? The Buffalo Bills, the Minnesota Vikings, right? And I always commend those fan bases because they stick with them. But yes, there's some research to suggest those that play fantasy, especially teams like the Bills, the Vikings, the Bengals, the Lions that have had tough seasons, that all of a sudden, as the season goes on or years go on without success, they then lose interest in their favorite team and just become fans of the league or fans of their fantasy team only.
How did you get started looking in this? Like, why did you decide to research fantasy sports?
I don't know if you know any fantasy football participants or anyone that plays fantasy sports. They're kind of like people who watch documentaries. And if you know anyone that watches a documentary, the first thing that they want to do is tell you all about it. Fantasy sports participants are the same thing. Like all they want to do is tell you about their fantasy team. It doesn't matter if you have any positive feedback for them or reinforcement of nonverbals. They're going to tell you all about it. The bad luck they've had, the good luck, the scores, everything. And I realized, one, that's going to be really easy for me to do research on because I'm going to have tons of research participants. Also, I also realized they're crazy. I lived in Los Angeles for 3 years when they had no NFL team. So everyone that I would go to a bar to watch NFL games was all people from Buffalo, Cleveland, Pittsburgh, you know, Washington D.C. And they were all there to watch their favorite team and to watch their fantasy team. And I'd watch them every Sunday in this like conflict in their head of watching their favorite team and saying to themselves, and also watching their fantasy team and saying to themselves, all right, if this quarterback scores 2 touchdowns, but my favorite team also does this at the same time, I'll be good. And it was watching that irrationality that I was like, this is really weird.
What kind of, I guess, what have you learned? Like, what would you say your big takeaways are from studying fantasy sports?
People play more for the social interaction than they do to win money, right? Everyone thinks that you play fantasy sports to win the it costs you $100 to buy in. You could win, $800. You could win $600, but that's not why people play. They play to stay in contact with friends, to make new friends, to interact and with their friends. That's the primary reason people play. And that doesn't matter if you're male, female, that's the number one reason.
What would you say has had a bigger impact on sports as a whole? Fantasy sports or sports betting?
Oh, sports betting.
Not even
Yeah.
close.
Yeah. I mean, it's just been around so much longer. I think, um, yeah, I mean, especially as it relates to, yeah, I mean, you can go back to the scandals associated with sports betting, whether it's Pete Rose or the Black Sox with Chicago Black Sox to even the current ones we're dealing with now. Like there are issues with the scandals, but also, you know, sports betting plays a role in favorites and underdogs and the stories associated with sports that I think sports betting is by far. Fantasy sports has been, it was a niche activity that was created in the, 70s, 80s, and it blew up in the late 90s, early 2000s, and is now part of popular culture, but it's nothing compared to sports betting.
Even if you looked at it just from like the last 20 years, it's still sports betting by a mile.
Yeah, I would say. The only thing I would add is one of the most interesting things I've found about sports bettors and the research we found is they all think they win. Like they all have, and the phenomenon is called selective memory. It's a combination of selective memory and illusion of control. But the question we always ask is, at the end of the month, give us what your balance is from sports betting. Are you up $100? Are you down $100? And almost every single one is in the positive. Now, we know that isn't the case, right? Like, there's the reason Las Vegas looks the way that it is. I mean, there's a reason that these sports books survive is because they win the majority of the time. But according to the people that we surveyed, and this is thousands of people that we surveyed over years, they all, in their minds, they're because of selective memory, they only remember the good months or the wins that and this has been true from daily fantasy sports participants and sports bettors. They month to month only remember having positive outputs.
Why
So
would that be?
a lot of it has to do is they have a higher level of illusion control. These are individuals that believe that they are dictating what's happening week to week in the NFL. They believe that they know more than the traditional fan.
I may have missed it, but that's unique to sports gamblers as opposed to somebody who's gambling just like on poker or blackjack.
No, it's certainly not unique. It's a traditional non-sports better. So all of betting, whether you are blackjack or playing at a casino, the same thing happens. It's just we find it at a higher percentage in sports.